So do we think that we can get away with pretending that it's breakfast time, or should we just acknowledge that it's 5 o'clock?
I don't think we even try to pretend. I think we accept. This is a bookish breakfast, but it's taking place at bookish mid-afternoon? Bookish afternoon tea. We've just had a cup of tea each with bookish afternoon tea.
Yeah.
You may recognise my special guest for today from booktube videos such as discussing cancel culture and scally-dandling about the books channel.
I'm Alf, I'm Phil's brother, and I also do lots of videos on my mum's channel, which is Sculling Down on Other Books.
Yeah.
And I've travelled up to Leeds to visit my sister because I'm on summer vacation, and it felt like it really nice to see him.
It's nice to see him. It's good. So what have we been doing this week? We've been playing a lot of Magic cards.
Yeah, and we've been chatting.
A lot of Magic cards. We've been chatting, we've been hanging out, playing board games, doing all of that stuff.
And it was mentioned, of course, that on Thursday Till normally records a video, and she was like, you did a guest spot for Roz, I demand that you do a guest spot for me. But then I pointed out that that's not practical because it's July and she's doing Jane Austen July books, and I've hadn't, on Monday when we were doing this discussion, read a full Jane Austen book ever in my life.
Yeah, so then I was going to work yesterday, and Alf was, what are you eating?
I know you told me not to eat the bread. I can't stop myself telling her.
I was like, you have to stop eating while we record the video.
I'll get crumbs in my beard, apparently.
He did. We started trying to record this, and he had crumbs in his beard. I just knocked a load of Magic cards onto the floor.
I'm the messy one. You're the one that's throwing bread everywhere. Yeah. Okay. But the point is, on Wednesday, Tilda went to work, and among the other things that day, I smashed out Pride and Prejudice in...
Yeah. What, 6 hours?
I wasn't reading continuously, there was lots of gaps, but yeah.
Basically...
Within the span of 6 hours whilst doing other stuff.
So anyone who says that Pride and Prejudice is too long would take them too long to read.
Just get good. Okay?
Less than a day.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. People need to just try harder. You are an exceptionally fast reader. Yes, I think that's one of your key characteristics. You stop finding crumbs to eat. No.
Yeah. So yes.
And being a good hostess and making sure that he's got plenty of food the wrong time.
Yeah, so
let's get back down to the Jane Austen stuff.
Yeah, so I've read this, so now we can talk about Pride and Prejudice.
So this wasn't your first exposure to Jane Austen at all, was it?
No, I mean, as I said, I've seen adaptations of Pride and Prejudice, both like serious ones like the Colin Firth in the Lake version, and
Colin Firth in the Lake specifically maybe not being the most serious moment of the adaptation, but both like direct from text adaptations
and like sort of weird stuff like the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which I found very entertaining when I watched it.
Yeah, and you were the one who introduced me to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, and that was an amazing revelation for which I will always be grateful for you for finding that.
It's well worth a watch if you haven't and you're interested in this sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a highly ranked adaptation.
What if Pride and Prejudice but vlog?
Yeah. I think that is the adaptation that probably best captures the satire of the original text.
I think that's a very fair because it's funny and it's kind of clever and it's like finding angles to attack the genre and the society in which it's set that are obvious in the text but are like totally absent in some of the adaptations, which are fairly straight to the line, like, oh, they're in love and it's romantic. It's like, no.
Yeah, most adaptations of not just of Pride and Prejudice but of all of Jane Austen strongly focus on the romantic angle.
Well, I mean, that's the bit that people like, though, isn't it?
That's the bit that sells film tickets and stuff, but it's not the only thing that's present in the book.
That was something that I noticed a lot reading it, and it was very entertaining.
Yeah. How did you get on with the style?
So it's interesting. Like, you can kind of tell that this was written before they entirely worked out how writing novels worked as a science or an art. Like, not in a bad way. Like, that freedom means that it does very clever and effective stuff it wouldn't otherwise be able to do, but at the same time it is like, like Miss Austen is going to sort of tell you this story as though she was saying it to you and has written down what she would have said sometimes, Yeah,
potentially. I mean, having read a lot of books from the time, I think she does that probably a lot less than her contemporaries, and does a lot more showing than some writers of the time would do. Carry on.
Yeah, I'd say that there's like the point of view control is the thing that particularly, and like tense control is the thing that I noticed a lot. That like they'll be inside one character's head, then do some scene dressing, then be inside another character's head without ever clearly delineating that the viewpoint is going to change at all.
Yeah, which is like characteristic of Austen's free and direct discourse. It's like the thing that she does is she moves freely around. Although we were talking about yesterday, she gradually focuses down on Lizzie's point of view more and more as the book progresses, and particularly the point of view that we have at the beginning of the book is Darcy's, and then we don't have that at the end of the book.
Yeah.
So Jane Austen wanted us to know that Darcy was falling in love with Elizabeth because she didn't want the reader to be as surprised as Elizabeth when Darcy proposed.
The first time.
Yeah, but she did want the reader to be in suspense as to whether
he'd accept him. Whether he still liked her.
Yeah, there's only tiny little bits from Darcy's point of view from then on.
Yeah.
Whereas in a modern book, you might be more likely to see different chapters from different points of view, or different,
or at least like clear section breaking of some sort.
Yeah. Very, very clear full sections from each point of view, rather than this kind of omniscient narrator area where the omniscient narrator describes the scene.
Yeah.
It would be that character describing the scene.
But you do still get modern books that don't have that sort of omniscient POV, and it's it's not.
Yeah. It's definitely a done thing.
It's like a bit unusual, and
I tend to prefer it, to be honest. I tend to find books that have really forced point of view changes to be a little bit frustrating.
Fair enough. The other thing that what was it? I completely lost track. Oh, this is terrible.
It's fine. We'll just I don't do editing, but we'll just point at the illustrations.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the illustrations in this. They were very good.
While you think of what it was you were going to say. So many illustrations. It's lovely.
And also, there's like there's this whole like dialogue, letters, thoughts thing going. Like there's this sort of different levels of intimacy to the character's viewpoint. It's like what they're saying, what they're writing in letters, what we are being shown in terms of being inside their head by the descriptive text. Yeah.
So this is a book that is told to a remarkable extent in letters. I think there are 40 letters that are either quoted or referred to over the course of the book, and it's definitely, the letter is what gives you the most intimate presentation of the person in this book. So it's,
and that's like a Regency cultural thing, though, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose so. We were also talking a little bit about like who can send letters to who, and like Darcy can write this massive long letter to Elizabeth, but she cannot reply.
Yes, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's just like the norms of Regency society, and Jane Austen doesn't seem to have any problem with that.
Yeah, which is clear because she does have problems with some aspects of Regency society, like the entail thing. Clearly, there's a couple of points that directly point at how ridiculous that is.
Yeah, she feels that is a wrong thing.
And like the fact that once Lydia is married to Wickham as a 16-year-old with no impulse control, she is then legally allowed to chaperoning polite society her vastly older and more sensible elder sisters.
And the fact that Lydia herself goes into Brighton, into the camp at Brighton, being chaperoned by somebody who is her own age.
Yes.
So Colonel Forster's wife is described as being very young and very recently married, and she is said to be similar in age to Lydia. So you can see that the situation of Lydia eloping, in some part, stems from the fact that the person who was watching over her was in fact also a teenager.
Yes. You've got these rules, but you haven't actually thought through if they make any sense.
Yeah, does not really work. But yeah, she seems to be perfectly happy with the restrictions in the way that.
I mean, to an extent, obviously, it's because it makes it much. You can have this big dramatic revelation from Darcy, and then just force Lizzie to stew on it.
Yeah, it's very good for your romantic tension, really, isn't it?
Which is like. The other kind of there's only one horse.
Oh yeah, it's like Jane's got to go to Netherfield, but the other horses are busy on the farm, so she's gonna have to go on only one horse.
And then if it rains, she wouldn't be able to go. Oh no!
She's gonna have to stay the night. And we were saying it's a bit like
there was only one bed.
There was only one bed, and the female romantic lead and the male romantic lead just had to sleep in it together. I am considering doing a video later this month called like blaming Jane Austen for Wattpad tropes, where we talk about how.
I'm going long by then. I'm only here till Monday. So.
I know. Yeah. How sorry, that's my cat being a bit noisy. How love triangles and things, like how they present in Jane Austen's work.
There's a lot of got side enemies to lovers, and then neutral planing in the back half. Solid. It's mostly Elizabeth / Darcy, but there's a strong side of like Lydia Wickham and Jane Bingley. Yeah.
So I suppose with character perspectives and so on, the main secondary love story in this is Jane and Bingley, and they are two characters that we basically never get any point of view from.
No, we really we get a bit of Bingley POV to sort of hammer home how much he likes Jane, and then we get letters from Jane, and she's quite open in her conversation because she's confiding in Elizabeth.
Yeah, so we get her point of view from what she says, but we don't really live her heartbreak because she spends months in London completely off stage
being sad,
and we don't get any of that. And
it's quite informed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You won't know this because you haven't read any of the others, but that comes up again in like Sense and Sensibility. We get a lot of Eleanor's pining, but we don't really get. We know that Marianne is very, very sad, but we don't really get anything from inside her head. And
is it because it's supposed to like? Is it meant to be like a suspense thing? Is it like, what if Darcy was right in what he wrote in his letter about why he encouraged Bingley to break it off?
Yeah, I suppose so. We don't actually know that Jane was in love. Like, she, even in herself, says when he comes back into the neighbourhood, we will be no more than acquaintances and things.
But is that protecting herself from heartbreak, or is that,
is she putting a brave face on it, or is she actually the ultimate Charlotte Lucas? In which case she played her cards very, very right.
I feel, I don't think there's enough to justify that reading, but it's still interesting to think about.
Could be there. So, speaking of Charlotte Lucas, do you have any particular thoughts on Charlotte Lucas?
I mean, she's not that much of a character. I think it's a bit mean of Lizzie to just immediately decide, you were my best friend, but you married someone that I think is a bit dim, so now I don't like you.
Yeah.
That's like
it's a bit harsh.
A big oof. I can respect it because Mr. Collins is awful.
Yeah. I think part of that, though, is a lot of, like, when you're looking at the ideals of the book, the ideal of the book is to marry someone who would, in all of Jane Austen's books, is either to marry someone who is very moral, or someone who you are really in love with, or someone who is both, ideally. And Mr. Collins is neither very moral nor someone that she's in love with, so she kind of goes against the things that this genre tries to promote.
But I usually like the ultimate reasoning for Charlotte is pretty solid. It's like, I don't actually think I'm particularly going to love anyone, and he seems tolerable and will come with a stable living.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'm the only person who gets very strong, not heterosexual vibes from Charlotte Lucas. Yeah. She's like, I am not romantic, and like, this is going to give me a stable home and family, and I'm not looking for the things that other people are looking for in this going to balls and parties thing.
Ace character interpretation's very valid.
Yeah, potentially. So that's Charlotte Lucas. One of the first things that you said when you finished this book yesterday was, Mr. Collins is irritating.
The man's an arse!
He is a bit, isn't he?
Just
general attitude and behaviour. He is quite frustrating, isn't he?
It's just like, gosh. There's all these different characters with like different pride, there's different degrees of justified that's causing them different amounts of problems. I think that's part of why obviously Lizzie ditches Charlotte, because of the sort of pride thing. But Collins is the person that has the worst ratio of being proud to having reasons to be proud. Yeah,
I suppose you've got somebody like Lady Catherine de Bourgh who is extremely proud, but society sees her as having a reason for being proud.
Yes.
I think Jane Austen would argue with that. Throughout her work, she is very dismissive of people with titles.
Yeah. I think Catherine is, again, it's on that end of unjustified pride, and I suppose that it's like that Collins de Bourgh thing is like there to provide the contrast to justified pride that Lizzie and Darcy have.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And then there's also, I suppose, there's incorrect forms of pride, like Mrs. Bennet is very proud of her daughters because they're beautiful, which is the thing that she's not really responsible for, but she's not proud at all of
how hard she's working on keeping the house nice and on getting them matched up, or
she's not proud of Mary's piano playing and bookish achievement. She's not proud of Elizabeth being like a resilient walker and clever. She's only proud of their marriageable qualities, which she only sees as their appearance. So I suppose it's like, what are you proud of is also one of the questions.
So just Mr. Bennet just hiding in the library. Big mood.
Yeah.
Biggest mood.
Yes. I don't want to life.
But I also like the whole thing that Mrs. Bennet gets the wrong end, gets like the short end of the stick. Like she's clearly, no one's told her that she's in a romance novel, and so as a consequence, she's trying to make sort of sensible and rational decisions to protect her children from being destitute, without realizing that actually, like being totally irrational is going to get rewarded by the narrative in this case.
Thing is, though, I mean, if she hadn't sent Jane to Netherfield on the horse to get rained on, who knows what would have happened? Because it's while Elizabeth is at Netherfield and Darcy falls in love with her, it really strengthens Jane's and Bingley's knowledge of one another, and it kind of shows that Bingley's a kind of upstanding dude that you would want Jane to marry.
Yeah.
Like, if Mrs. Bennet hadn't made Jane really potentially quite ill and stranded in the rain, it could not have had a happy ending. So, she did the right things.
Absolutely.
A lot of her worries are really exaggerated and criticised, but at the end of the day, she is the one that's looking forward to a future in which she and her 5 unmarried daughters have to survive on the interest of £5,000, which is not a lot of money for 5 people to survive on.
Well, I was the impression that they would move with the relatively successful merchant aunt and uncle, wouldn't it?
I don't know that the merchant aunt and uncle would be able to provide a home for 6 women.
Yeah, that's fair.
He's a successful merchant, but he's also got 4 children of his own.
Yeah.
And presumably not limitless space. It's not like... family members would support them, but would not...
It would be a dramatic drop in the standard of living. They'd stop being gentry and start being...
And like her other brother and sister I think her other sister's married to an attorney, so it's not like in other books we see people, depending on their relatives who are members of the landed gentry, who like have a spare cottage for them to live in or something like that, but they don't have anyone who would be likely to be able to provide them with a home. So it's very natural for her to worry. She just doesn't maybe have the best strategy for that.
No crime in not having the best strategy for things.
So we should have a bit more sympathy for Mrs. Bennet.
The characterisation, isn't it? Like they're all very over the top, but in quite believable ways. They're like one step over the top, you know what I mean? Which I think is good for that sort of for a book setting. Yeah.
So what I found reading some bits of literary criticism on Jane Austen, there's quite a divergence between people who think her characterisation is the strongest point and that she writes the best fool characters and the best characters all round, and people who think that her characters are underdone or overly caricatured. So I just find it interesting that she kind of divides opinion on that. I think people who are saying that her characters are caricatures are either potentially slightly missing the point or just really, really looking quite hard for something to criticise, because if you compare the caricatures that Austen uses with the caricatures that Dickens uses, it's like this is very much toned down, and even to caricatures in other works at the time.
The other thing that we talked about is that there's like a fair few characters in this that you could like read as non-neurotypical in some way. You've got to imagine that there's a lot of people with like sort of autism spectrum disorder headcanons for Darcy or Mary, say. Which I think is very it's justifiable, and it's interesting because they wouldn't have had those labels right in that time, but there's still aspects of that come through in their sort of personalities.
Particularly with the Bennet sisters, in having 5 children. It's logical that there might be somebody in that group of 5 who is not neurotypical, and then you have Mary, who is often trying very hard to say the right thing and like reads these texts that tell her how to behave and tries to behave according to what these texts say and doesn't manage to get it right, and nobody seems to really support her in that.
Obviously Lydia's extremely impulsive and moves around lots and has poor
maybe poor impulse control, I suppose. Definitely. So it's interesting
it is very interesting
that you can definitely see those interpretations in the characters, whether or not open to.
And that's got to be there's where that's coming from the reader, or
it's whether that's coming from us with our current knowledge of how these things were, or whether that was written in by the author because she must have met people who
were like that.
Well,
because it's been around forever. It's just only recently
we've been naming things. Did you have any other particular areas that you wanted to comment on? Any bits that you found particularly funny or particularly moving?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
That's fine. We can just stop also.
We could stop. I think it's like for a book that goes all the way around the country, it's quite kind of close, you know.
Yeah.
It's like it's like there's like not a lot of characters or a lot of loose ends. It all very tightly locks together.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the distinctions from other books of the time where the author kind of got carried away and tried to do too many things. But like, for instance, Lizzie goes on this amazing expedition to the Peak District, and the author just says like, oh,
it's not really the point.
yeah, like the wonders of these places have been described by other pens, and then later on Lizzie and Darcy are talking, it's like they talked about Matlock, but she doesn't say anything about Matlock. She's just like, they talked about the places that Lizzie had been to. Whereas if you read something by like Anne Radcliffe, she writes on and on about, oh, they rode the carriage through these dramatic mountains and the mountains were dramatic, and in doing that loses a lot of the focus of the book. So yeah, Jane Austen's writing is, like you say, it's close, it's like very much under a magnifying glass. These like little sets of houses close together. Very tightly.
I really enjoyed it. I may well try and read another when you're at work on Saturday.
I reckon you could blast through Northanger Abbey. You could probably read two of them. I mean, if you read the shortest two, I think that would be Northanger Abbey and Sense and Sensibility. Or you could do Lady Susan. That's quite different. That's got a lot of letters in it. It is in fact told entirely in letters.
That's a
I think you'd enjoy Northanger Abbey most, maybe. It's got the gothic element to it.
Fine.
No, I'm just saying, like, Mansfield Park is like really dense and moral, and I think you have to know a relative amount about the time period to appreciate Mansfield Park.
I know about.
Okay, read Mansfield Park then. Go ahead.
I'm going to read Northanger Abbey because that's the one you suggested first.
Sure.
I might not read any of them. I might decide to do something else whilst you're away on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty proud of myself because I've got Alf to read one of the classics of English literature in the course of a day while he's visited, so I count that as a success.
That's good.
And it's we're done. We're done.
Was there anything else you want to talk about since this is your any other reading this week that's worth pointing out?
I think I'll mention them on other videos so that this stays focused as a discussion of Pride and Prejudice.
Sure.
So I hope you have enjoyed this. Let us know your thoughts about Pride and Prejudice in the what do you call it? The comments below. And thank you very much for watching. And thank you.
How long have you been making videos that you don't know what the comments are called?